From Las Vegas, it's Let's Talk News Now with Rick and Ella.
And welcome back. We're enjoying Beatlemania, Beatle trivia, Beatle tribute. What is it? Is it all of the above?
It's everything.
Breakfast with the Beatles is a little of all of that.
Okay.
Like I said, it's mostly a listening party, but it's tons of information. What the Beatles are doing now, Paul and Ringo and Olivia and Yoko. It's a challenge to tell the story and retell it each week because it's the greatest music phenomenon we've ever known. But the trick is to make it interesting for people who don't know anything about them and are just finding out about the Beatles, and also make it interesting for those fans and that culture of fans that know every little detail.
Right.
So you don't want to bore them. They've heard it all, and you don't want to go too fast for the up and comers. And you do see it across all generations. Beatles fans are all ages, and that continues, and that astounds even me.
Now, you mentioned today is June the 6th.
Yes.
And you said there was something relevant to June the 6th.
Quite significant.
Okay.
Unbelievable. It was 50 years ago today that the Beatles first went into EMI Studios, now known as Abbey Road Studios in London, to work with George Martin. They had an audition with Decca Records. It's kind of famous on New Year's Day of 1962, and the people at Decca said, no, guitar groups aren't going to make it, and they turned him down. That guy lived, I think his name was Dick something, and he lived a kind of dubious distinction of having turned the Beatles down.
Kicking himself in the rear end.
Right. So in June, their manager, they had hired Brian Epstein to be their manager by that time, and he arranged for them to get their first audition at EMI, and it was on June 6th, 1962. So you picked a pretty cool day to have me in. Sgt. Pepper just turned 45, and we always address these cool anniversaries on Breakfast with the Beatles as well. As part of the fun, you know.
Okay, now I have a question for you, Al, and that is, we talk about Beatles and Beatlemania and so on here in the States, and we're just talking about here in Vegas. It's just Beatles and Vegas are just synonymous. Is it such a big deal in the UK?
Yeah.
They do.
Absolutely.
So they will absolutely acknowledge all these same things today.
I actually liked the Beatles from my primary school teacher, who would bring in the CDs and make us sing it.
Oh, really?
Just before our naps.
Really? I love that.
So that's most of the songs I know about the Beatles. Is
I love that
just
nap time
before I went
music.
to sleep.
Yeah, must have heard Good Night by Ringo quite a few times, I bet. That's an excellent story. And some of the best guests I have are in the UK. A regular visitor to my show is Tony Bramwell, who is a best friend of the Beatles, was there when John met Paul, ran Apple Records for a while, carried their guitars into their gigs for them, that kind of thing. As British can be, and still holds up the flag and attends Beatles conventions. I talk to people in Liverpool. We're having Paul McCartney's stepmom on soon because he's turning 70 years old later this month. So there's always a good news angle. There's always something interesting going on with the Beatles, and that's like I say, Breakfast with the Beatles is like your news program for the Beatles each week.
Okay, personal question. If you could be any one of the Beatles and be up on stage and be in concert and perform, which one would you be?
I don't know. Boy, that's a tough one.
Gotta pick one.
I look at all the things that George did that were so wonderful and helped other people. I guess I'd have to lean toward George, because you can make a phone call and get Bob Dylan to come down and Leon Russell and all the cool people in the world because you're George Harrison. Maybe George, I suppose, because of the benefit concert angle.
I mean, they're so amazing. Since then, have you seen any other bands that you think might be able to live up to that?
We were just talking about that. I was talking about that with engineer Ken Scott, who is one of very few engineers who got to work with the Beatles at Abbey Road Studios.
Right.
And he was fumbling with the question of whether this phenomenon could ever repeat itself again. And we just don't think it can. The consensus has to be because they became so popular that everybody not only loved the Beatles, they became intricately involved in each one of their lives. These are four individuals, and they knew them all so well that any one of them could do anything and you'd know. And the Beatles just became bigger than the Beatles.
And they're so timeless.
And you can't come up with a band now, even the most popular artists that people love, that they know that much about or that they are that passionate about.
Here's one of the things I enjoyed. I watched a recent interview with Ringo, and he and Sir Paul are so careful with the brand that the whole idea that there would somehow be it'd be a reunion, but a reunion in this case replacing those that have died with their siblings, the type of thing. And Ringo just said, no, we're not doing this. He killed it right there on the spot. I will not do this. This isn't going to happen. Okay. And they're actually kind of careful because during the Olympics and so on, Ringo's going to be here in the States and Paul's going to be in England during the Olympics because there is they're kind of even careful about when they show up at the same place at the same time, so it doesn't get misconstrued
that's
Right.
interesting.
as being
Yeah.
some type of.
Everybody runs
reunion.
wild with that. The last time was, I think it was Ringo's 70th birthday. Paul showed up. People went crazy. And just recently, there were hot rumors that the Beatle children, one of Paul's and John's and George's and Ringo's kids, were going to form a band.
Right.
It was just somebody's idle talk and idea, and wouldn't that be cool? But the rumor mill just went crazy with it.
We have about 40 seconds left.
Okay.
You had a couple things I think you were going to share with us real quickly.
Yes,
Yeah,
we're giving away all kinds of prizes on Breakfast with the Beatles. Yellow Submarine has been re-released on Blu-ray, so listen to win a copy, or the new Ram CD from Paul McCartney. But the first time ever, Breakfast with the Beatles is going to make a presidential endorsement in these divisive times. I know
Yay!
everybody's very passionate about it. It's so divisive. I know there's a candidate we can get behind. And so for the first time ever, Breakfast with the Beatles formally endorses Ringo Starr. If this would happen, can you see what good shape we'd be in? Do you see how
Yeah.
much peace and love every day, everybody?
You heard it here first.
Right?
I want to thank you so very, very much. What a huge pleasure.